Good evening, witches, warlocks, sorcerers, adepts, friends, fans, family, and followers to Season 4, Episode 4 of the hit underground radio occult show known as Knights of the Nephilim, brought to you by Celestial Oddities Radio and the Coterie of Samil Arcane Occult Order. As always, I will be your host and guide on this obscure and mysterious journey into magic and mysticism, darkness and divination. I am Reverend Frederick Crow, and it's an honor to have you listening in this evening. Whether you're listening live, streaming after the fact, or you've downloaded this to your device for on the go, I do want to thank you for your patronage and support. Just please click the like, share, follow, and subscribe buttons on whatever platform you're tuning in from, whether it be iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Deezer, Spreaker, CastBox, Google, Amazon, Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. That's a mouthful right there. We air across absolutely everywhere and everywhere in between. So feel free to listen where you please, but by clicking those buttons, it moves us up the podcast community rankings, allows more people to discover the show, and keeps you in the loop with new episodes as they air, not only of this show here, Knights of the Nephilim, which is based upon esoteric science, occult doctrine, and ritual magic, interviewing and talking with the biggest and best names in occultism, from authors to ritual practitioners and toolmakers to theologians and mystics. Or it be one of our other shows, like The Pong, Pair of Normal Guys podcast. We deep dive into supernatural and paranormal phenomena, interview professionals within that field, and do special call-in episodes known as Oddworld, where we listen to extraordinary and strange stories from you, the listener, from all over the world of what you've experienced. Or it be our last show, which is now retired, and it's called Uncovering the Underground. We have almost 100 episodes of interviews with music and modeling, stars of the big screen, comedy, oddities, and everything in between. We're always aiming to bring you great content and thought-provoking content. So if you like what we're doing here at Celestial Oddities Radio, make sure you share it around, tell some folks about it, bring them into one of our shows. There's something for absolutely everyone. We do want to thank you for tuning in to our episodes this season, I should say. This is Season 4. We're honored to be back with a new season, not only audibly like we normally are, but also with a visual aspect this year. So if you are listening out there on Spreaker or on iTunes and you haven't been made aware yet, we do have a visual component to the show now. You can check us out on YouTube, Instagram, and multiple different Facebook pages and listen and watch us, see our guests, ask us questions. There is a chat feature, and that is the main chat that I'm keeping an eye on these days. So I'm not keeping an eye on the Spreaker chat or any of that anymore. It's all coming through Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all comes right here. So listen wherever you like, but if you want to engage in the show, that's the best way to do it. Also, if you want to support the show, by all means, we would certainly like that. And on your screen right now is a buy me a coffee, because your support is what fuels me and does my passion, and your coffee is what gets me through the day. So feel free to take a picture of the QR code, throw a couple bucks on there. Anything you can donate certainly helps keep the show running and keeps me going throughout my day. I really appreciate it. We do want to thank our sponsors out there: Limitless Liberations, Goetic Impressions, The Telemancer, Belladonna's Botanicals, Arachne Arcane Services, Little Shop of Lilith, and Arsenosis. So that's always a lot to try to remember, but we want to thank each and every one of them. Throughout the evening tonight, we will take a break to listen a little bit more about these companies, who they are, and much, much more. So, stick around for that. Tonight, we have a great guest on the show. He is a return guest, and I'm talking about Jon Vermilion, the owner and operator of the Violet Gateway. He is the author of several really good books. First and foremost, he has Zakael, the Stargate of Kryst, Asaya Ka Luxa, and his new book, Azazya'il, the Fallen One, which is a great book I haven't got my hands on yet. I've been kind of watching it. I've been hearing some reviews about it so far. Soon to try to pick it up. I'm a book nut, and I can't keep up with my passion of reading. I have so many books, I can't seem to get through them quick enough, and my wallet's hurting from it. So at some point here soon, I will have that. But I do have some of his past releases. Now, like I said, if you're listening out there, share this around. If you know Jon's work, you know what we're about to jump into. But as I say on each and every one of our episodes, grab your, ritual athames, put on your ceremonial attire, light your candles, and focus your desire. Step into the circle and intone the sacred names, give offering and praise, as we stare into the flames and conjure the spirit that is Jon Vermilion. All right, folks, we are live this evening with Jon Vermilion, owner and operator of the Violet Gateway and author of multiple great works, as we've talked about. Jon, it is an honor to have you again on the show, brother.
Likewise. Good talking to you again, man.
It's been a while. I looked and I had to jump back and look at the date of the old one. It has been almost 3 years.
It has, yeah.
Pretty crazy to think time flies that quick.
Yeah, 3 years. That's a long time.
It is a long time. I mean, it doesn't seem like
bad, huh?
Yeah, you know, it's crazy to think the show's been going for a little over 3 years, going on 4 years now. Yep. I mean, it was just kind of a memory, it seems like the other day, or just a thought, and then here it is 3 years later.
Yeah, well, it's come a long way.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So how's things been with you, man? What have you been up to?
Fantastic. Obviously, writing. Of course, with the new book, Azazya'il.
I wasn't sure how you pronounced that.
I have to say it like that. I spent almost 3 years hearing him say his damn name in my head because I couldn't get it right. It's Azazya'il, and
wow.
it breaks down to the proper angelic intonation of the call. It's still Azaz, Azazel or Azazel or however you want to say it, but it comes down to the root of Azaz, A-Z-A-Z, but then the proper suffix, and that's what makes it really hard because we all know the L or the eels when it comes to the suffix, and when you're working with, I had to work with the Arabic gematria in this book, it's actually Ya'il, so it was hard because every time I said his name wrong, it's Azazya'il, and he'd be very strict with it. It was very clear communication.
Okay.
And yeah, I don't know. After a while, it's just like, okay.
Now I got to try to remember that throughout this
evening. It was one of
evening.
those things I had to practice. I actually had to practice saying the name and the proper pronunciation, because when you're doing the calls in the book and intoning the right names, you have to be so specific because, if you're not calling the right name, you're not getting the right spirit.
Correct. And you might, and that actually brings it to an important point, and we can start right off from there. I mean, wasn't where I was expecting to, but I like how sometimes that's how it goes. And if you are to call a spirit with a different intonation, what are your thoughts on what you're getting? So, for example, with the name that you use, you're getting more of a raw essence of it, as that is what he was wanting to be called. But if I'm conjuring the spirit or summoning the spirit and I'm using Azazel or someone else uses Azazya'il, do you feel that they're getting the same spirit but a different resonance of that spirit, or do you feel that it's something altogether different because of the different... It's almost, we were talking recently, Baal Cadmon released a phenomenal course on the essence of Lucifer and how he is never actually a real character, and he's become more of an egregoric thought form that people have created over time because it was all from a mistranslation, that there never was a character Lucifer. That's actually a fallacy. So, you start to look at it, and I personally have never worked with Lucifer because I've known for a long time, from me being a huge follower of Alephus Levi, or Alephus Levi, that...
I would say his name properly.
Yeah, we're going to make sure we say names different ways tonight. But he talked a long time ago about the fact that was a mistranslation. So I knew that from an early age, and a lot of people didn't. I had a lot of people, say, I've had wonderful experiences, evoking Lucifer, and I said, well, I never have, because I never felt it was a real entity. And then this course recently came out that really backed that up to a degree that I can't, because he does it in about 6 different languages. But what's your thought of calling a spirit by a completely different name? Are we getting that spirit, or are we getting something that we create?
It comes down to the mathematical equation. Like, what are we saying? When it comes down to gematria, it's so finely tuned. Like, gematria is like, to me, it's the scientific basis of occultism and what we're trying to do. It can prove and disprove absolutely everything within the geometry and within the mathematical equations that happen with it, but yet it's not even math. Like, when you really dive into gematria, it's not even math. So but we have to still look at it mathematical. Like, take, for example, if I'm going to call you on your personal cell phone and I miss you by a number, I'm not going to get you. I'm going to get the person adjacent to your phone number.
Yeah.
Right?
Makes sense.
Same with your house number. I'm going to get the person adjacent to your house. You know, so really when you're calling the wrong name, you're calling, I wouldn't even say the wrong name. It's more of the unrefined name, I guess you could say. You're getting the neighbor, or you're getting a possible egregore that is wanting to parade as that person, so, or that entity. It breaks down to the number, and in the book I explain the difference between Azazya'il's real number compared to what everybody else is kind of using. You know, Azazel is like, it breaks down to a different, I don't remember off the top of my head, I have the book here, but I want to spend time looking. It's not exactly how it is when it's Azazya'il. When I made contact, it was not like, I didn't like call. This was not a thing that I was going out to do. So I didn't want to go out and start calling upon spirits. I never did that before, blah, blah, blah. I have my own counsel, and I later found out that my counsel is typically somehow connected to him, and the story goes on. But when he came to me, it was very proficient on how his name was said, how he needed it. This is when I was really starting to hone in and tighten up my work with the Arabic craft and the Arabic abjad systems and stuff, because that's what the spirits were communicating with me in. So I had to kind of learn how they wanted to communicate. When he showed up, it was very. I told him to leave. You know, like, no, go. I didn't summon you. I didn't call you. Go. You know, but he said something that made me get my notebooks out and open them up and said, "Okay, let's communicate." And then it started a 3-year process. And this happened right after the release of Zakael. And I kept it hush-hush. I didn't really talk to anybody about it. And I just kept doing the work. Realistically, I didn't write the book because every time I sat down to write the book, he was off to the right of me. And he was very prominent, and it was constant. And it wasn't like a person or like an entity. It was very far removed, but it was so strong of a projection on the right side of attention that I just couldn't dismiss it. So I just sat and wrote and listened to what he had to say, because I didn't know much of the lore. Everything in that book is basically him talking. And when I went back and took the manuscript and started actually comparing my manuscript to other things that have been written, like the lore and the stories of what he is, it matched very, very damn close. So, Merrick, I see the comments in here making a quiche. Sorry, it's an inside joke between me and Merrick.
Gotcha.
But yeah, it's crazy how it all came to be. But no, I mean, if somebody calls me, say for example, John can be spelled 2 different ways. It can be spelled a couple different ways, John or Jon. Yeah, you might be saying John, but what if you're calling a John that's not spelled the same? It's not going to be the same John. It's going to sound the same, but we're talking gematria. So when we're saying a name, we're also thinking the name. We're also seeing the name for a brief second. You know, whether we're conscious of seeing that or not, it's happening in our head, like a little flicker. And when you're calling names within a call, you need to be like, and you have to have these flickers going because you have a flicker rate. And if you're not calling the right name, and yeah, it doesn't mean you have to be 100%. But typically speaking, I mean, the more perfection, the better when we're talking magic.
No, I agree with that, and I'm glad you actually said that, because when you are doing the right, as you said, it's not just about audibly saying it correctly, it's also about internally how you are visioning that, because you are opening the doorways of perception, opening the doorways of your internal mind, and if you are thinking different than what it is that you're trying to, you're going to have a different result. I mean, that's when you look at ancient works like the Sword of Moses. I mean, when you look at the Sword of Moses, it is a never-ending alignment of what seems like just random chitter-chatter. But it says in it that you have to nail it. You have to get it exact. If you don't get it exact, you're not getting the resonance that you're trying to call.
You can look at it like a painter on canvas. You know, if they're trying to get the right tone of color, I mean, if it's not peach, it's not peach.
Yeah.
You know, if it's not what they're looking for, it's not what they're looking for in the tone of color. And a lot of it still goes down to magic. And yes, magic is very open. Magic to me is a very open thing. I think chaos magic is the thing that really touches on how magic works. Whereas a lot of these other systems are really held in religion at one point and certain philosophies and dogmas, where chaos magic is just whatever. It's the will, it's the intent, it's what are you putting into it, what's in your mind, what are you projecting out. But at the same time, not everything should be discredited on the other side because it's all coming from the same place.
Agreed.
So it's just a lot of people are using things that, 5,000, 6,000 of years ago were being used, and in our dialects today we don't really know, and that goes for a lot of even Hebrew speaking, a lot of Arabic speaking people, especially in the Arabic cultures. I mean, there's tons of different dialects of Arabic, and nobody really knows what they're talking about, but yet somehow they do. And the same goes for Hebrew, and you have to look at what's broken, what's not, what's magically sound as a means of communication, a means of language, because like the Hebrew 22 doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know how 22 falls into our occult principles of 7 and 4 and 8, and I don't see how that works mathematically, so I can't really give it any way. And I used to use the Hebrew until I just couldn't fit it into how I wanted to use it. That's what got me into the Arabic, which was like, okay, this is a 28 base system, 28 lunar mansions, 28 bases on the lunar phases. Okay, sweet. There's an actual hinging point here. 28 goes on the 7, 28 goes on the 4. All these numbers are relevant within that 28, and you can mathematically, like precision based, hone in a system that you can actually start making a closer connection. Is it 100%? Hell no, because what I'm dealing with is, I wouldn't even call spirits, I call them ETs because I know them differently. Now, can I go and interact with a spirit? Sure. But I'd say I interact with ETs because I've actually physically had some crazy experience with them. But they operate in the same way, but they don't have the same language as us. They're telepathic. They don't need a language. So then you have to go to a language that hinges very high into the astral and very magically sound to even make a understanding of what the fuck they're trying to tell you. So that's what I've spent Sanskrit. I see a question there. You work with Sanskrit. I would love to work with Sanskrit. The only problem with Sanskrit is what are they? Are they a 28 or are they a 36 or are they a 32 base system? There's a lot of missing letters in the Sanskrit, and I would love to be able to find like the basis of Sanskrit, because that'd be
like the codex of it, and be able to really see what the original forms, because that's the problem with a lot of different ancient forms of writing and even language, that we go off of what we know for the languages that are no longer here, but we could be missing a very large chunk of what the core of that language or that practice was. So all we are left to do is to try to fill in the blanks, which is a great endeavor. And I mean, there's a lot of growth in that, I think, whenever you're experimenting and changing and taking parts out and adding pieces in to figure it out. But at the same time, we might be missing a whole section of it that we never can figure out unless we have that section. So it is very tough.
Right. And that's when it goes down to like trying to interact with the entities or the spirits or whatever everyone wants to call them, to maybe be able to have them show you symbols or sounds or colors or certain things to be able to understand what they're trying to convey to you. Because they can convey to you in thoughts and this telepathic message, but you still have your shit inside of you that's being filtered through, so they could be trying to show you something super archaic, which is super easy for them to understand, but the next thing you know, it comes down to your mind and it's an orange.
Yep.
That's
very important.
They're trying to show you a whole galaxy and the forming of it, and you're like, oh, cool, shell and orange and juice.
Well, and you know what?
On a different level, but it's not so precise. And ever since I started, I mean, my whole life, I've been looking ways to be able to. I won't work with something unless I can at least try to prove it.
I like it.
You said something important there. We can live in imagination all day long, but I want physical proof. And I got to the point with some of my counsel and stuff, even after my death, and I had these intense experiences with them. No doubt they're real. I would constantly kept questioning. I'm like, if you're real, you got to do this. You got to do this. You got to do this. And the next thing you know, it was just boom. I got so real that one appeared directly in front of me physically and was like, is this becoming too real for you? And I was like, yeah, a little bit. Let's back it off a little bit. Let's go back to telepathy. So it's been a ride, and being able to have one foot over there and another foot in this world, it's easier now than it used to be.
Well, and you said something very important on that last point, and Lon Milo Duquette and I on the last episode touched a little bit on that as well. Is during ritual, if I don't hear someone make some type of mention of this, I usually question the validity of their practice or how deep they're going, because, as you said, the spirits or the intelligences work off of your vocabulary set and your understandings. So, as you said, them trying to show you a galaxy might come through as an orange. And you might look at it and say, well, I don't understand what that is. And some people might just shrug it off. But you have to understand what the orange symbolizes and dig deeper into that. But when I hear people not talking about symbols at all during ritual, it throws me off, because ritual very much, and in communication with spirit, very much is symbolic. That's how they communicate, folks. They communicate through symbolism a lot of times. And that symbolism is obscure, and a lot of times we don't off the bat know what it is. It takes contemplation, it takes time, and 6 months down the road you realize something that you were shown 6 months prior. That's how it should often work. And when I hear people just say that they had a communication,
is to that entity or spirit that gave it to you, it happened then.
Yeah.
But for you to understand, it took 6 months.
And that's important. That's important as well, because the astral realm's timing is very different than ours. And we actually talked about that on one of the episodes, where if you go in to astral realms and astral projection, if you plant seeds in the astral planes, it's not going to happen right now for you. It's going to happen a different time period, though it is happening right now there. It's hard to explain that, but there's not a exact correlation of timing between the two planes. And as you said, yes, 6 months down the road when it happens for us, it happened in a mere second for them.
It already happened, because they already see it in 6 months from now.
Exactly. So that's very important to know for folks listening out there. And I love the fact that for you, Jon, and we've talked about this before, you don't really pay attention to a lot of the dogmas. You don't pay attention to a lot of the lore and the history, not only of spirits individually, but also of what a lot of other practitioners are out there writing or doing, or who they are and what their name is. You are very much centered into your work. And I appreciate that for the respect, as you said, and I'm going to butcher it again. I'll say it my way. When working with Azazel or Azazya'il,
Azazya'il.
That's brutal. Azazya'il. When you're working with that entity, you learn from that intelligence itself, then went back and correlated with the tales and the lore, and I love that. It's the backwards approach, but it's actually a very good way to do it so that you're not influenced. Because another thing that I have talked heavily about to different people I've done classes for and things is that if three practitioners summon the same intelligence, but they've all three read completely different sections of lore and history of that spirit and use the exact same practice, all three will have very different interactions with that spirit, because once again, your vocabulary set, your mindset, and your understanding will very much paint that canvas, and once it comes to life in different ways. So 100%. By eliminating that dogma and doing it the opposite way, like you're getting the raw essence.
Right, and that's still valid. Like, to me, that's still valid. It's just what I would consider not, like, it's still part of the imaginarium. And I'm not saying imagination isn't bad. We have to use imagination to even be able to develop psychic functions in the first place.
Correct.
So the imagination is super helpful, and I don't even look at it as imagination. It's just inner sight, like daydreaming. We need to have that, but there's something past imagination which lays within the second and third and fourth levels of consciousness and attention that you start being like, oh, I was wrong. There's been many times where, that I haven't published it, but there's been many times in certain manuscripts or certain notes that I was writing that I'd go back and revisit and do it again and try to come up with the same answer, and I couldn't do it. So I was wrong. I meet the feet and I try to keep going with it. When it comes to certain book like Azazya'il, it was, like I said, I don't feel like I really wrote it. I was the conduit of it. There's me in it, but it was, my personal work with him, but it was very much him doing quotes, and I had to put quotes of him, and I would be writing a certain lore, and then I would hear him talk about what he thought of that idea.
Okay.
Like, what is said about him. He's been the scapegoat.
Yes.
Everybody, oh, it's him, it's the devil, it's the devil, it's the devil. You know, it's constantly, I do this because of this. And honestly, he doesn't mind that. He wants to eat it. He's like, "Oh, give me it, you know, whatever." He's so much more than anybody could even imagine. He doesn't even care. It's minor stuff. He's got much bigger things to deal with. And it comes down to, you know, what does he want to say and how he says it. And it's not even that he was saying anything. It came off as a feeling. It came off as this almost like download into me of how it would feel, even though an angel doesn't have feelings. So it was very weird because it made me sometimes feel angry. I was pissed off. I was a little more aggressive, snappy as shit sometimes. And it wasn't because I was angry, just because the human condition almost bothered me.
Makes sense.
And what he would feel, you know, because the human condition bothered him from day one. And one of the quotes in that book, and I don't know if I'm quoting it properly, and other people have it, they could definitely quote it, but it says, like, how am I supposed to bow to something that will never know its maker? And when it goes in the lore, he never bowed to Adam because Adam wouldn't remember his maker. He would be prone to physical third-dimensional consciousness, which isn't even aware of outside consciousness of itself, so much denser than a jinn or an angel would ever be. So why would he give credit to something that would still have to go inside of itself and remember where the fuck it came from? And that's the kind of energy that he would give away. And it made total sense. It did. I was like, oh, I feel you. I understand. You know, like feeling that, I could see where kind of that feeling from an angelic perspective would give it.
Well, when it comes in, you know, so like with it being channeled work and it comes into you, as you said, it being an angel of sorts doesn't have emotions as we would think, but once it comes into our vessel and we're channeling it through us, we do feel that, because as we go down in vibration, that's where emotions start. I mean, emotions are a very physical, very earthbound human asset, I guess, or, you know, if you want to call it an asset.
I mean, I don't think they're an asset.
I was just going to say, I don't know if I would call it it might be a liability, actually, but
it is a liability. I don't know. I come from, of all the work I've done, I've really come to understand that free will and the emotional state of humans is a mistake.
Yeah,
and it's something that's been programmed into them. Jinn have free will too. I personally think that's a mistake, because in the angelic context, they don't have free will. Angels don't have free will. They're functions. They're just functions in the mind of God and separations of God to do what they're supposed to do.
Yep.
They're, in a sense, they could be almost looked at slaves. And you look at demons and you look, oh, angels are slaves, and demons can do this, and they're closer to human attention and blah, blah, blah. No, the demons are just the negative polarity of the same thing. They all serve a function.
Yep.
So there's no difference. Mm-hmm. It's just how that function is done.
I agree.
Which energetic temperament it is.
And that's another real, what would I say there? Another real showing of a real practitioner is, you know, people get too tied up into the angels and demons and the lore and the dogma of, and I tell them that when you're summoning a demon, you're just summoning the negative shadow side of an angel. They're one and the same. There's this big war that everybody wants to paint this picture of this Christian ideology of war and devils and demons and angels, and I'm like, just cut all that shit. It's fun to do that. I mean, it's fun to talk about that stuff and theology. I love it, but at the end of the day, it's stories that we as humans painted to understand ancient beings that have been around long before us, and they are one and the same.
Doing so, it feeds the astral.
Yes.
You know, our emotions and our thought are feeding the level above us, which is the astral, and the astral also flows down. And it's like we're constantly feeding this emotional, turbulent ocean, realistically.
It's the grease to the wheels, yeah.
You know, and next thing you know, it's all coming back down, and angels are far removed from the astral plane. They, you know, they're so removed from that thing. And in the story of Azazya'il dropping down into physical reality, of going into what most people have known as Iblis, it's the same entity, just as a different name. He stepped down, became Iblis. And that's where a bigger rival, like, I can't talk right now, but it became that, so that it created more kind of war within the Jinn and within ETs, which I consider ETs. And, you know, we're talking lore and stories that happened well before, I mean, our known history on this planet.
Now, do you think with a lot of these stories, the misconception can be made too that with some theology and some lore, that we as humans are making this up? In some cases that is true, obviously, but some of it is it bleeding through to our consciousness, and these stories that we're coming up with, we're not coming up with. These are the spiritual stories that they're pushing through us so that we know more about who they actually were prior to us.
Correct. Yeah. And, you know, if a spirit comes to you in personality, it's generally it's being filtered through the astral. You know, like when my experience with Azazya'il, I knew that the personality that I was perceiving was not the real personality. It was like filtered through the astral plane and your own consciousness and etc. But he still held himself at such an exalted state that it was almost undeniable.
And do you think that's why so as you said, when he came down and took Iblis, that personality, that character, that as the lore goes, you know, he couldn't bow down to man because as being something so far removed and so much above it, that to think of being subservient to flesh and to man was just really a joke. Like, how could I am made of fire. How could I bow before clay? You know,
100%.
And
that's it's almost said exactly in the book like that.
Yep, yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so it's you know, it is interesting, and I mean, as you said, he has been a scapegoat throughout multiple religions, whether it be Islam, whether it be Christianity or Judaism. I mean, obviously Yom Kippur, they still sacrifice 2 goats, one to Yahweh and the other to Azazya'il or God damn it.
And the Yazidis do the same through Malak's house.
Yep. Yep, there's always been that story. Yep, there's the one that they send away as the scapegoat for the sins of man to the great primordial evil, so to speak. And I mean, I think it was just them trying to make an understanding of something that can't possibly be fully understood by ignorant minds.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, you know, and this is the first. You know, I usually don't, like I said, I don't really work with spirits outside of what you would consider my family, because I know where my counsel and all that come from. So it was a journey for me because I learned these connections between certain spirits that I work with and him and how they all interplayed. And it was a huge learning moment for me. I was like, wow, this is beautiful, you know. And I remember I kind of was sitting on the book for a little while and I did a ritual, and, you know, I have a little thing with him that I do a certain thing if I really want to make direct connection. And I did it, and next thing you know, the book was finished in 3 days.
Wow.
I was like, well, all right, okay.
Well, something's going on here.
All right, let's do this.
How did that feel, though? Like, whenever you sat back with the finished product, and you obviously know that this was a channeled work, and it was really, you were the hand, but he was the guider, and you looked back and read through that book as a fully finished product. How did you feel at that point? Like, holy shit, like, wow.
Yeah, I mean, it felt great. You know, I felt the same way that I finished Zakael and Asaya. You know, Asaya was like, that was the holy crap. This manuscript's been around for 13 years and I finally get to publish it. You know, I was crazy ecstatic at that point. You know, so I'm kind of used to having a finished product and kind of putting it out. There's still excitement to it because it's new. I like to hear people's feedback, etc. You know, I like to hear the people that are buying the books. I like when they communicate. You know, I got tons of people that reach out, and I try to at least reply all the time, you know, at least a little bit, you know, and it's cool to see the feedback with it. And when it comes down to releasing this book, it was different because I was working with a direct spirit that I was okay putting a book out on. Like, I don't really find myself putting out a book or a textbook on communicating with one of my council members. They've never asked.
Yeah,
you know, except my next release. I take that back. My next release is but but that's very connected to Azaz. So
yeah, it's brutal to say that name, man. I'm gonna butcher that throughout the entire night.
I don't want to butcher it myself, and I'm the first one. It's hard. That's why I was like, Ya'il. Like, even when you came down to typing it in English, I was like, how do I even write? I can write it in Arabic all day long.
So is it Azazya'il?
Yeah,
Azazya'il.
Azazya'il.
Man, I'm gonna have to work on that one.
Yeah, no, it took me a while, and every time I got it wrong, I would just hear it again, really clear in my head, but I couldn't reproduce it.
Now, question for you. I mean, so you mentioned, and obviously you're very big on working with your own spiritual counsel. You know, what would you tell someone out there that, you know, because we live in an age now where I think for a lot of people, they're in this pop culture new age where it's not necessarily about the depth of connection, sadly. It seems to be a numbers game. I don't know how many times someone will come to me for deeper advice and I start to talk to them, and I can tell they have a numbers game. How many spirits can they summon? Oh, I'm working through the Goetia and I've summoned 60 of them.
It's become Pokemon.
Yeah, it's become Pokemon. You got to catch them all. I've done 60 of the Goetic demons, and I'm like, well, why? Why would you ever need to summon that many spirits of one book or of any pantheon ever? I got to be honest with you folks. Have I worked with a lot of spirits over time? Yes. But I've always found myself going back to the same 5 or 6 spirits.
Correct.
Because there's no need to step, unless there's something in life outside of that something specializes in that and I need to work with that energy. Okay, but I never understood the gotta catch 'em all Pokemon side of it, like you said, where it isn't about connection, that it's just about like a bragging right. And unfortunately, there's already enough of that, folks. I mean, look at 95% of the people online talking magic, and 95% of them are full of shit. There's only that 5% that's really out there doing magic procedures and out there doing ritual, and it's pretty easy to spot when you talk to them. So, what I was getting at is, what would you give advice-wise to someone out there saying, well, how do I find my spiritual counsel? How do I figure out what spirits truly resonate with my spirit?
Typically speaking, 99% of the time, if you find it with open eyes, you're doing it wrong.
Yep, I agree with that.
I spent years in meditation.
That's the biggest thing you could possibly do.
And dream work. And, I after my death, that's all I did. I died when I was 21, and I spent 4 or 5 years just doing that. That's all I did. And I was, had tons of crazy experiences leading me in really crazy dreams. I wouldn't even call them crazy now. I mean, I'm glad that they happened, but it was all led me to get back into meditation. And I would wake up from the night, go in meditation, because I'd want to keep communicating with those entities that were communicating with me. And the only way that I could get back there was, fucking going back to sleep. But I wanted to do it consciously, and this is how, after my death, I had a hard time. My first mentor that came along, still love him to this day, still talk to him. He had to actually teach me more how to stay in body, because I would be talking to you like this, and next thing you know, you'd see me go like that, and I'd come back and talking to you, and people would be like, "What just happened, dude?" And I couldn't.
I left for a little bit.
I fell out of body. My bad, but when that would happen, I would literally feel myself drift out of body, and then see both of us at the same time, and float for a second and get back in. So I had to really anchor myself into my body. So my thing was grounding, where most people are trying to get out of body to see.
You're trying to get in.
Reality, I was trying to get in my body to stay there, because I had a very dislocated death experience. So coming back, it was more traumatic than good. And it was a healing process, and a lot of that happened through meditation. But everybody, when people say, "Oh, my Patreon's Lucifer, or my Patreon's Azazya'il, or my Patreon's Sekhmet," that's great, and maybe it is true, but maybe your Patreon is actually coming to you as them because you're not willing to accept them for who they actually are. Maybe they're not as great. Maybe they're even better. Maybe they're, there's always a mask to how they're going to come to you at first. Me personally, some of mine didn't come with masks, and that's what threw me for a loop, and it threw me for a huge loop, because none of mine looked like the spirits or the demons or anything like that you normally find in textbooks. They looked very ET, and those are the ones that I've continued communicated with over and over and over again, because it was a cycle. I could keep communication with them in physical time, and I could keep communication with them in dream time. So those are the ones that I knew were the ones to keep around. But that doesn't mean that I don't work with other spirits. And me working with, Azazya'il, it made me realize where the connections were. And everybody's going to find their different connections. Nobody's the same. Some people might have the same connections, and that's where we get into, my first book, Asaya Ka Luxa, we talk about oversoul, and people can share same oversouls, and it's the same exact concept. You can share the same oversoul as another person, but you're going to have different experiences, different means to get there, etc.
It's a phenomenal book too, folks. If you haven't checked out Asaya Ka Luxa, please do. It's a great book, and there's still. So one of the funny things is, last time you and I talked, John, I know that Zakael was out of print. and now it's back. But Asaya Ka Luxa was in print at that time. Is it still in print now?
Well, now on my website, yeah.
Okay.
It's not through Azazya'il Press. They're great. But I just know in my route that I want to go and what I need to say, and what I need to say contradicts a lot of stuff. And I've been quite fringe and kind of on that teeter-tottering of almost conspiracy sounding and not sounding conspiracy sounding. I just need to be able to self-publish so I can say what I want.
I think self-publishing, honestly, for a lot of folks, it's important.
And Azazya'il Press never stopped me. I just know that the next releases that I'm going to be putting out, I mean, it's going to be way different than what people would consider in the occult, because I'm trying to give them a means to actually contact an ET that's willing to be able to communicate. And chances of that happening, you have to be very precise, but the chances of that happening are good, I would say. But it's a very intense process.
Well, the thing is any real deeper forms of magic aren't going to come easy, and that's the thing that so many people out there are seekers, and they're looking at every book they can get their hands on, and every practice, and attention span these days has purposely been brought to almost non-existent, because if you're pulled in so many different directions, you're never going to commit to any one fully, and therefore you're never going to reach the depths of what any one direction can give you. And, you were talking about deific masks, and I think sometimes it'll come up in conversations and people say, do you believe that there are deific masks? Absolutely. The same energy can come to you as 40 different entities that you know of in history, and they do that because it's how you're able to understand or process that specific energy. But if you go deeper, there is something deeper than that.
I love that you say that, dude. It reminds me of like my favorite story in Islamic in the Islamic religion, and it's actually when Muhammad rode into Mecca, and they had originally in Mecca they had a bunch of statues of like all the deities. They had tons of deific statues, deific masks. That they're all worshiping the gods, right? The gods, the big S at the end of it. When they rode into Mecca, they smashed every single statue and building, whatever you had that had that kind of deific mass on it. They destroyed it. They only left one. That was Mother Mary. They left one, and that was it. And they basically were like, how are you worshiping all these gods when there's only really one? And it's very prevalent because that one God is us too. Like, you're the same God. I'm the same God. You're a different mass than me. We're all the same at the very, very minute core of the soul and the cell and the atom. We're the exact same being. But we're just experiencing ourselves so vastly in different experiences. And it goes the same all the way through until you reach that epicenter and point.
Yep, that 0 point, and what's funny, John, is and obviously I'm a very left-hand path practitioner, but what throws a lot of Satanists and left-hand path practitioners when it comes to me is I talk about Jesus a lot, and I talk about the Bible, and I talk about the Torah and the Talmud, and I start to talk about these religious texts that people will say, well, I don't understand. We hate that shit. We want to burn it. I'm like, you hate that because you're ignorant of understanding, because even though I might not agree with Christianity in a lot of senses, I can say that, let's look at the New Testament, for example. What was Jesus saying all along? Look inside yourself, and you will find me and find the kingdom of glory. When thy eye be single, I am filled with light. He talks simply over and over and over again about the fact that we are God.
If they sit and meditate, everybody on this chat right now watching, tuning in, everything that watch it later, if they all sit in meditation long enough and get rid of the monkey mind and actually sit in meditation and find that there is a light that opens.
Yes.
And it's a very physical thing. And that's why I've always been if you read my work, it kind of ties the spiritual realm with the physical realm. And I've always wanted to do it that way because it is kind of one and the same. You can also take the physical body with you in ascension. So you leaving this dimension, you can take the physical body with you. Now, is it easy? Hell no. Like, hell no. You got to go through incredible, rigorous stuff to be able to do that. Like, if your consciousness is vibrating at, let's say, in musical terms, like a note, okay, like 800 hertz. Okay, let's say your soul is vibrating at 800 hertz, your mental capacity, 800 hertz, and your body's at 300 hertz. Those hertz don't match.
Nope.
So the physical body's not going to match that octave. It's not going to do it.
Yeah, you have to
doesn't mean you
oscillate
can't
that
leave
body
your
higher.
body. Doesn't mean you can't leave your body and go do that. But how does one take the physical body with? It's very possible. Has a lot of people done it? No. And if somebody has done that physically, I can tell you right now, they're not. They're in a monastery somewhere far removed from
humanity. Yeah, they're not talking to people. They don't care.
Yeah, they don't care about President Biden or Trump or Ukraine. They don't care. They're so far removed, and they've reached a level of human evolution that people would literally kill for and have.
Well, you know what? I want to see what you think about this, John, because it's something that a lot of people have been like, holy shit, Frater. One of the things I have been heavily into, not only in my personal practice in occultism, but also my paranormal research, and it's just kind of bled through in every area of my life, but is brain hemispheric synchronization entrainment, and using isochronic tones and binaural beats and training my hemispheres of my brain to come in alignment with each other physically, to also help me project astrally and through meditation. And what I've been using that for, and folks, if you haven't heard about this, I'll give you a little synopsis, but if you have, bear with me. I don't mean to beat a dead horse here. If we're, if we're pushing 40 hertz into the right ear and we're pushing 80 hertz into the left ear, or we'll say 100 into the right ear, then we're not hearing 40 or 100, we're hearing the 60 in between, and then we literally harmonize our hemispheres of our brain both to 60. That's the magical thing that Robert Monroe had come up with, is the fact that one tone and another tone, you don't hear either, you make up the difference between the two, and frequency harmonize your hemispheres. Now, using this, you can then put your brain into a very specific frequency. And using this, and this would bleed over to John's work in a way that could be used, if you find out the exact numeric Gematrian code of that spirit, or that frequency, all of this, you can then set up your ritual very, very specific way with that exact color, that exact frequency, that exact Kamias, the magical square. You can use all of these and then tone your mind to that exact frequency whenever doing a conjuration. And it has, I don't know how to put it, it has mind-bending results where you will dissolve reality to a point that you have not yet experienced. And I've used this not only in ritual, but I've used this also in paranormal field, where I'm able to cause manifestation to happen in ways that people don't understand being a possibility. Where, you can always go out and just talk to spirits and have interaction, sure. But what if you can tune your mind specifically into the frequency of that specific house? And then it opens up a doorway where you just changed your sense of reality to a whole different sense simply by vibrational code. And as John said, Gematria codes is everything.
Exact same way.
Yep. Frequency. It's everything is free. Why? And then let's go back to the Bible again, just to piss off my left-hand practitioners, because I love it.
The Bible's a great occult work. I know everybody hates that.
And the thing is, it has so much good fruits of.
Come on now.
It has so many fruits in it.
Same shit.
The Word was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word became flesh. Well, what is the Word? What is the verb? The Word is the frequency binaural codes that are coming into the world that created manifestation from a low vibration to a high.
Before all that was sound, color, and symbol.
Yep.
And that's where we lost at the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel is when we started splitting our tongues from a form of almost telepathy. It was like the right below level of telepathy when human races were really dropping in consciousness. And that's really what happened, was people started splitting their tongues, the tongues which they spoke, trying to explain the same exact thing, which is all explained via telepathy very easily in symbols, colors, and tones, because they're just registered instantly. Mm-hmm. But no, we had to call a tree, and a desk, and a rock, and we had to do this. And next thing you know, there was difference in tongues. Like, no, we call this, and it became so filtered. It's crazy how human consciousness works.
Well, and it's interesting too. You can relate that to the story
I understand I'm in a human vessel, but I'll never understand it.
Well, you can relate that to the story of the garden as well. I mean, if you look at the garden, Adam. So whenever God gave Adam the power to almost be an undergod, and he said, you can name the animals. Once he named the animals, he had dominion over the animals, something that was, God breathed his life force into Adam, but he didn't when he created the animals in the Bible or the Torah. If you notice that, that means he gave the essence of himself to humans, and as me and John were just talking about, we are God. We are a smaller fractal of that God force energy. We are one and the same. Doesn't matter what religion, what theology you want to put into, all these stories tell the same thing in essence, but he didn't breathe into the animal, but gave man the power to name, therefore giving that dominion over the animals and being the God to the animals. And that is
that fits with an old reading of mine when I asked my counsel where animals came into place, like why animals have changed over the time on the planet, like why there's no dinosaurs, why there's certain species that go extinct, etc. And it actually plays into the mind pattern of the species that's more prominent on the planet. So as a human consciousness, we're more apt to build mammalian consciousness, but since we're also reptilian, we still breed the reptilian consciousness also on the planet. So we have a lot of reptiles and mammals. Between that's always going to be fish. But we still have that means of making that within our own consciousness, because on a different planet, it's not going to be the same. And it's not so much because of the planetary elements, but it's the consciousness that's embedding that planet. Just like Jupiter has a consciousness that oversees it, Saturn has a consciousness that oversees it. Everything that's built into that planet is the consciousness that oversees it. And humans, we, as a humanoid on this planet, the highest in evolution, we just have a more stronger effect on the reality here within our consciousness. And if we have a bunch of gods creating a bunch of bullshit, it gets intertwined, and that's why we have a lot of wars, a lot of, this and that with religions, and my way, your way. It's been a big separation for quite a long time.
Well, and I think working with ETs, as you said, I mean, if we were to dissolve all the false idols, if we were to dissolve all the deific masks, and we just work with consciousness, with the true root, it would dissolve a lot of these problems. It would dissolve a lot of these wars and these afflictions that happen because of this frequency differentiation, I guess you could call it, because we're causing our own reality, but our realities are merging and colliding with other realities because of how we specifically do our workings, our beliefs. We're scattering that, and a lot of those are told in those same stories. I mean, it's hidden in beautiful stories, I suppose, but it's really telling those truths.
Mm-hmm. That's why you got covens and certain magical orders. They're a bunch of people together working on the same view, and they put all their attention and focus on creating a certain reality. You have our government doing the same exact thing with certain PSYOPs and CIA and NSA programs. I mean, the NSA knew about HemiSync well before the service people.
Yep.
They were working with that. I used to have access to like the original Monroe HemiSync stuff, and it was quickly taken away off market.
It's powerful.
It's quick, and it happened really quick. And the stuff that's on the market now when it comes to Robert Monroe's stuff is not exactly the real HemiSync that they were using back then. All that's still being used in CIA and certain black ops projects, stuff like that. So,
yeah, they released the document from the CIA, which obviously isn't the full scope of it, but they released some of the stuff that they were doing with it. And obviously, as you said, the stuff that's out there now can still have powerful results, and it does. But there was one tape in specific that I was able to get my hands on a while back that was some of that original. And like I said, what happened for me is whenever I used it for the very first time, after I came out of meditation with it, I could hear lights. I literally could hear what sounded like a jet engine, but was simply just the electricity pulsating through the light above me that normally you would never hear. It was so loud that it was like blowing my eardrums out. And at that point, I realized, like, holy shit.
All the time, and people want to discredit like electronic bombardment, electronic mind control, and stuff like that. It's like, come on, you just have never reached a deep enough level in yourself to be able to actually start hearing the shit that is happening around you.
Yep.
And it is a real thing, and people really need to wake up to the electronic mind control via satellites and ELF towers. That's a real thing. Whether people want to go, a conspiracy theory, okay, enjoy. Enjoy. But it's a real damn thing, and the fact that more and more people are waking up to the actual reality of it, how it works scientifically and biologically, and it's awesome. But it's a very real thing.
Well, think about it like radio waves. I mean, right now you could sit there and say radio waves don't exist, but the second I click on that radio, it's always been around us. It's here right now around our heads.
It works the same exact way, dude. Like,
Yep.
I remember back in the day I sat, and this was like a while back, and I think I was like 23, 24. I was pretty young, but I was constantly in meditation. I had this certain chair that I absolutely loved. It made me really relax. I'd sit in this chair, and I could just, boom, leave body and just float out. It was great. And I wish I still had that chair. Yeah, it was like an Egyptian throne, basically. It was just a leather chair. It was great, and I kept pushing myself up and pushing myself up and pushing myself up, and I could see myself in the clouds and hearing all the sounds and the frequencies, and all the words and the mumble jumble, all the shit. And I kept pushing myself, and I finally heard this thing that sounded like what you would hear in channel material in the New Age, like a Pleiadian message. You know, it sounded like that. So I tuned in on it. I was like, "Oh, what am I hearing?" And I was able to hold my attention, which is a great feat. I don't think I've ever been able to do it again. I held my attention so long that I was able to listen to the whole message. And then it went blank. And I held it. And then it repeated itself. Like a radio. Like just a signal, a pulse being sent out to whoever was listening.
I like that.
And I was like, oh, it's fucking coming from satellites.
Oh.
And I will argue any channeler, you're 90% of the time it's going to be coming from satellites and certain technologies. Yeah, it might be coming from a being, but it doesn't mean that you're fully telepathic connected. You're a really good psychic. You're a really good channel. It's just, where is it really coming from?
True.
Be real. I know sometimes when I get messages, I know it's coming from a ship, not exactly a being. It's coming from a ship. That's where I can pinpoint it. That's all I can say. I can't say, oh, it's this being on that ship, and not all the time anyway. And I just know if it's coming from a ship, if it's coming from ELF. ELF is usually more negative, and I haven't gone through, knock on wood, that kind of bombardment for a long time because the techniques that I share, the protection, my books.
Well, how much do you think, so like with a lot of the messages that we are getting, and it can even pose itself as extraterrestrial intelligences, how much of that do you believe that people are picking up is true ET intelligence, and how much of that is man-made, fabricated, not even necessarily man-made, I don't want to use that term, how much of that is governmental or program related to trick us?
And if it's coming from certain ETs, they have certain investment within the government. So I once put something online. I posted, I'm sure you can probably even search Facebook, you'll find it. I said something like, the goetic demons and the angels that people are usually invoking, they're just invoking ETs contracted by the government. And I got a phone call like that. And they're like, take that off the fucking internet. And I was like, all right, I'm going to leave it. They're like, you should not say that kind of stuff. And it was funny because I was like, well, I mean, it's true. It's true. Now, is it wrong? No. Put yourself in their perspective. If you want to talk about Illuminati and these people, these little ruling families, you're a small minority that has to lead a world and your worldview to get to where you want. If you were that, you probably would do the same thing. But it's how it's done is one way or the other. They clearly are not doing it the best means, because if people really look into it, it's pretty dark. Like, not dark as when we think, oh, I work in dark magic, but it's dark in the perversion.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's an interesting, way of looking at it, because for a long time I've told people that, and I originally picked this up from Baron and Baronessa Aragni a while back, where they talked about the goetic demons as simply thought forms. And this was years ago, but they talked about the fact that none of them are actually real ancient entities for the most part. A couple of them are. They talked about Belial being one of the ancients.
Like Payman.
Yes, and there was a few they said are, but the rest of them were just kind of, fill in the blank spacers, you know what I mean? And that really had me looking at a lot of the left-hand path work that I was doing very, very differently. That, you know what? Just like the Lucifer thing, you might get an interaction. You might get even results and manifestation from that entity. But where do you want to be? Or are you okay working with egregoric thought forms, or are you wanting to work with true essences and then what's beyond those essences? So it really had me starting to look, a lot differently at that. And I love the fact that you're saying that a lot of them might be deific masks of.
And I'm not even going to put it as a might,
I hate to say might, so they are.
I wouldn't even put it as a might, man. It's I've lived a very interesting life, and I've got to talk to some, very amazing people that have done way more amazing things than any of us. Let's put it that way. And you know, the stories and the opportunities and just the sheer things they've told me and things I've personally experienced. It's very, very intense how things really work on this planet. You know, it is. And I urge anybody to look into a certain project, and it's declassified, quote unquote. It was part of the MK Ultra program and, you know, the MK programs. It was MK Often, and MK Often was originally like, let's just dose a bunch of people with drugs and see how they act, you know, and then it became, let's dose a bunch of people that know how to act on the drug and explore consciousness and explore being able to infiltrate and change things or affect things from a distance by leaving your body and doing certain black magic rituals. Okay. And this is what some of these projects got into. And if you don't think that, that's why they kept them so secret, because they were, hey, we can do certain things. And, you know, I had a talk with somebody once that I know he worked on Project Bluebeam project because I called him out on it because of what I was hearing in my head, and I called him out on it. It rocked his world. He wouldn't even talk to me. He finally talked to me, and you know, they were working on being able to conjure certain things physically, like in the room. You wouldn't physically see them unless you were really psychic, you know, but they would ask them to do things like, hey, move that over here, and then that would happen. But in the room, they were electronically and you know, through the use of technology, reading what was happening at the atomic and the quantum level while this was happening, you know, and this is somebody's day job.
That's crazy.
You know, so when we're sitting there worrying about what our fucking president's doing, the person doing that doesn't care.
Yeah.
They're working for projects that don't have anything to do with your surface level knowledge, you know? So it goes very deep. And that's what's really interesting about consciousness is if we can think as deep as we possibly can to God, you can imagine the atrocities and amazing things also that have happened.
Well, and the thing is a lot of people don't focus on that. Like right now as we're speaking, folks, sure, there's a focus on, you know, space travel. There's a focus on all of these other different things out there that seem so crazy. What do you think they're putting more money and energy into than anything? That's discovering the true depth of consciousness and what we are capable of doing once we tap into those deeper levels of consciousness. You know, sure, going to the moon and making it to Mars and all of these things is great, but that's just something to blind you from the truth that if you go within...
It's fucked up is they go there by...
Yeah.
They go there by going and leaving and going. And
yeah, you don't need a spaceship, folks. Spaceships aren't needed.
And that's, you know, one of the things, like people that see ships and cool things in the sky, most of it's our technology. It's our government's technology. And that's amazing. People should be happy about that. Don't be mad about it. So when it finally comes to be that they finally release technology and everyone thinks it's fucking aliens, don't be mad about it. This is beautiful technology. But whose hands is it in?
Yep.
I'll always play that card. Whose hands is it in? Because history doesn't start with Earth. Earth is such a minute speck when we're talking about physical reality and the experience that's happened in physical reality and the spiritual reality which has created that physical reality.
Yeah.
So it's two different things, but it's absolutely one and the same.
Yeah, they're tied together. And we always like to think about what we experience as being like the bedrock of everything. Like this is the epitome of everything. No, this is just one small, as John said, a speck of much bigger works that have been in order. And as you said, John, you know, a lot of things that we see in the night sky that are unidentified flying objects, they are just that. They're unidentified because we're not familiar with what they are, but it doesn't mean that they're alien or ET. It just means that we don't know what they are, and a lot of times they are governmental vessels that they have come up with, which is phenomenal feats of engineering.
Give it to us.
Yeah, give it to us. Let us take a ride. I want to drive one of those bad boys.
And there's a reason for that, which I can actually highlight. To actually use these vehicles, it ends up being a form of part of your biology. Like to actually use the really advanced traveling craft when it comes to your consciousness, it becomes part of your biology. So not everybody can do it. And there's been people that have absolutely lost their lives trying to do such things because their biology is not advanced enough to be able to connect to such, in a sense, it's an AI. but it's a biological AI thing that's connected to your ship. And I've seen it in dream time and certain experiences where the person piloting the craft would connect to the craft. And it was only that person that could do it. And then would have to sit there and think a certain pattern. They'd have to just really get into a meditative state. And next thing you know, a bunch of shit would happen.
Well, and you know what? Something I think was being done in ancient times, that it talked about it in ancient text, was in the Holy of Holies in the Temple of Jerusalem, the gold room. Only once a year was the high priest allowed to go into that room. And there are texts out there that said that some of them were incinerated. They were going into this room with the Ark of the Covenant, which was alien technology of some sort, and they were able to fly. Now, this is a little bit different than governmental vessels, but they were able to fly some type of biological DNA-encoded vessel of consciousness, and it didn't always work out great. Some of them had contact with the highest levels of consciousness that you can reach, and they were in union with God at that 0 point that we talked about earlier, life-changing things, and it could only happen once a year with one person who earned that right. But they also talked about the fact that several of them were just killed, where, they didn't come back out of the room. They were incinerated because they couldn't handle it.
I didn't know that. I did not know that.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't. They'll talk about the Temple of Jerusalem and this and that. Why do we think, folks, once again, that's why I relate so much back to these texts, because there's a lot hidden in them. And one of the things that they talked about, why do you think, these other rulers destroyed the temple? Why do you think that they didn't want that there? Because they knew they had this ultra weapon. They had this weapon that they were able to fly, some type of biological UFO, a biological vessel into different planes of consciousness. It was groundbreaking, but in the wrong hands, it was also very dangerous. And that's why the Ark of the Covenant was so mysterious and people talked about it. It was the seat, it was the throne of the Holy of Holies that, was a wormhole. It launched us into other planes. And, who knows whatever, they say that it's housed. I forget where they say it's housed right now, but there's a place that it's housed and watched. I don't believe that shit's even where it's at.
There's so many Stargates. We've had wars started on the surface level for Stargates.
Yep.
That was made to be something completely different. And really what it was for is to go infiltrate a Stargate, and they had to shush, and I have no problem saying that kind of stuff because I frankly don't care saying that kind of stuff. I got a lot of people saying you probably shouldn't say those kind of things.
Well, the thing is, it's knowledge to anybody that knows where to look.
It is. And there's so much going on that, people live their daily lives, which is fantastic. I have a daily life too, but knowing what's really going on puts you in a complete different sphere of this world. And
it does.
Luckily, we're on a precipice. We're on a precipice of this world of amazing change. I've been viewing the timelines since my death of them intertwining a bunch of timelines, and they keep getting closer and they flicker faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. And eventually we're going to hit a point where it goes, and then we branch out again. But there's always this moment of this, what you could call 0 point, the beta, all these things that have talked about these moments in time, quote unquote. It's really these merging of timelines going, and then it goes out again. And all these moments of timelines creates a new age, if you will, in consciousness.
It does.
And we're heading into that. Now, the thing is, it's going to be wonderful for the people that survive.
That's the point right there. Is we're at maximum velocity right now, folks. We're heading very, very fastly towards a precipice where it's going to hit that resistance, and it has to push, and that resistance is a lot of strife, it's a lot of war, it's a lot of chaos, and that's what we're going through in small portions now, which will get worse. And as it pushes through and pushes, and then it will pop, and when it goes through, as John said, those who survive will be at the dawn of a new age of humanity. But there will be a lot of people that don't survive the velocity and the impact and the force that we're going to feel going through that field. And that you're experiencing that. The last couple of years, things like COVID-19, things like the consciousness shift that you've noticed. I don't know, I don't think it's really news to anybody out there, but there are more people waking up right now than ever before. Yeah. And, a lot of people notice that. I know one one set of people out there certainly notice, and that's the church. The church is noticing it in massive amounts of people all of a sudden no longer wanting to attend Mass and thinking for themselves. It's a scary thought when the sheep all of a sudden realize that they don't have to stand in the field anymore and they can wander off and become the wolf. So, that is happening, but we're only experiencing the residual outcropping of that. There's going to be a nuclear bomb of force that's going to come in the very near future.
Yeah. And it's funny you say that. I know that.
Well,
it's okay. No, as much as I know, there's as threatening as the nuclear thing is, there'll probably be a staged event. I say probably because people can sit there and doubt it. A staged event that does mimic that, but it's only to lead a certain thing to happen a certain other way. The
false flags.
Great, yeah, a lot of false flags and a lot of stuff kind of happening. And people got to realize right now we're living in a movie. There's a lot of actors. There's a lot of bad actors. People will sit there and say that sounds QAnon, but I've been saying what QAnon's been saying for the last 20 years, and they're new. And it's a very. I'm not saying QAnon's right by any means.
Well, and I even think that the QAnon part of things also is a false flag in a way where they are saying. Yeah, it is, exactly. They're giving seeds of truth.
I remote viewed the whole QAnon thing. It's a real thing. There are people involved in it.
Oh, yeah. Shit ton.
I honestly didn't get anything negative from the energy that I was seeing. And I almost only could see it through like what looked like if you took like a beer bottle and turned it upside down and looked through it. It was very diffused and kind of differential in color and stuff. And I could see people, and it would look like a room of things in it, but I couldn't get definition. And I was just outside of this like window almost thing, and my presence was felt enough to me be able to be thrown out like a wet towel, but it wasn't like negatively thrown out. It was just like and that was it, and I was just like, okay, fair enough, whatever, tried again, never got there. But it was just one of those things like, okay, fair enough. I took my notes and I understood it a little bit more, and I was like, all right, thank you, and I knew what I seen I could share because I don't have really any information on this stuff. I just knew there's people behind it. It's definitely a psyop, and it's not a negative psyop. Not all psyops are negative. Why does a psyop have to be negative?
I think it's just that's what people think of when they hear it. There's certain terms that are used that have been painted a certain way, no matter how different they might be. Once you hear it or see it, it always takes you back to what they want that to be. And I think psyops
programmed impulse response.
Oh yeah, it's impulse response, exactly. I mean, it's just kind of instilled into us. But you said something very important multiple times tonight. But I mean, that's another one that you said, I'm a regular man. I live my regular life. But I think once you go so far into consciousness, it becomes very strange, folks that are listening out there that might have experienced it or might experience it, that your character of who you are becomes very much, and I mean, you've heard this from mystics all of your life, but it becomes very true. Your character, your ego, your persona is exactly that. And once you go so far out, you really have two different lives within the one person. You have your magical life, and you have this deeper understanding of consciousness. And as John said, it's hard to come back to the flesh because would much rather just go into meditation and never come back and just launch that consciousness and just never return here. But you come back and you play that character. And yes, you are invested in that character. You're invested in your family and your job and the things you do because it's very much a part of this vessel and this reality. But there's also this whole other side that's not you. You realize that you are just throwing on your actor's coat and you're playing on the big stage, and it's very difficult sometimes to to be able to do both.
What do you do here? That's why, even in the Bible they do good things, treat your neighbor good, all that kind of stuff, because the good you do is good, but and the bad you do is the bad. But there's nothing judging you at the end except yourself. And being somebody that has died and had to go through that life review. Sorry, Kitty, I just accidentally kicked my cat.
I did the same thing about 5 minutes ago. She was over here. I'm like, get out of here.
Yeah, he let me know. He's like, your foot's on me. You do end up having a moment of massive self-reflection at death that shows you absolutely everything you've ever done the things you could have done, the things you should have done, would have done, probably could have done, like all these different experiences all happening at once, all based on your own actions and your own demeanor towards everything that you've ever experienced. So it's not God judging you. God so far removed from your experience that it's you that judge it before you go back there. And it's that attachment that we get through that judgment. Like, oh, I should have done this.
Yep. We create our own heaven or hell.
You decide to choose to come back here eventually. And I specifically remember having a choice. Like, I remember asking, like, what do I do? Like, I had this like moment of just kind of feeling like this, like I never told you to leave. I never told you to stay.
Yep.
That's kind of how I felt in that cradle, and if you could call it that. And I was kind of like, all right. And I remember being slammed back into my body. So I obviously chose to come back, and I remember choosing that. I clearly chose to do that. And the reason why is obviously played out over my life. But it's, everybody does get shown that. So it's you're not judged by a god. You're not judged by anything but yourself. And that's why the whole story of Anubis, weighing the heart against a feather, is if your heart and your attachments of your heart and the love that you withhold and the love that you give and all this kind of stuff is not as light as that feather, you're not going to be able to float into those higher realms as easily, because
you're right anchored right back here.
And Anubis will bring you right back here. Okay, let's go.
Well, and you and I have something very in common, very similar there, and we've talked about this, where I actually have been witness to past lives and came back. Now, in this life, I didn't remember coming back, but then I was showed somewhat of a choice, and I talked about being killed in that, not even in a physical realm, and in an astral realm of sorts, where it was the way I explained it is my spirit had to die to come here.
Astral as physical.
Yeah.
So I totally get it.
Yeah, so it was like in the astral, I had to die to actually then be alive here. It's a mind fuck. But one of the first things you said to me during that conversation, and I was typing out the answer before you even asked, and we literally sent them at the exact same time, was I died ceremoniously by taking a knife to the center of my throat, and that's how I had to die in the astral to come here. And as I was saying, and it's interesting because I had this vision, and when I was born with a hole in my throat. And just as I was sending that, you said, do you have any scars from that? And we literally sent it at the same time. It was interesting. Yes, folks, I have a hole. It's a scar now, but I was born with a hole in my throat. And it was interesting, many years ago, I had this vision of how that got there. But it is
a lot of birthmarks. Like if people have birthmarks, like relative birthmarks on their body or certain really strong markings, it is because the cellular memory is very adjacent to that past life.
Yeah.
You have lifetimes that you can look at it as a circle and you're the center and they're all happening now. But, there's ones that are closer to the energy in your experience in the now.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that are usually more adjacent. So, I mean, if your previous life that you're still very attached to and have certain either personality aspects or emotional connection to it somehow, those things are going to solidify in the physical biome.
They do, and it's quite amazing, honestly, to experience that and to see that firsthand. And another thing that you said that really resonates is the fact that, yes, there is no divine being up there judging your actions except for yourself, and by you judging and by your thought patterns, you're creating your heaven or hell once you leave here. You're choosing where you go. I mean, think about heaven to every single person is a different idea.
Heaven's still an astral concept.
Yes, it's an astral
There's
concept.
a place that people would consider heaven, but it doesn't have a name. It's so far removed from.
And your heaven could be my hell.
But you
and that's what
consider
makes
these
it
fluffy
unique.
winged humans, like it's nothing like that.
And the thing is as you said, the God force, the all, isn't thinking about you, because if you want to go to Kabbalistic thoughts, for example, what did God have to do to create this world? He created the act of zikzum, which was the contracting upon himself, because as long as he was in that sphere, nothing else could exist except God. So he had to pull himself backwards and separate himself in the vacuum to give us space to be us and to still have the divine essence and spark within us, but to also not be with him. So he is very far removed, right from the story of creation. He is far removed from us because that's the only way that we could even exist, is from his retraction, if you want to look at it that way. So when you're worried about where am I going to go when I die, well, you choose that. How do you look at your life? How do you feel about the things you've done? Have you been a good person, or have you been an asshole and a piece of shit your whole life? And if you feel that you are, and you feel that there's going to be repercussions to those actions, then there are going to be repercussions to those actions. So you choose where you're going to go.
Yeah. And, it goes back on karma. Karma exists, but there's also people that have been outside of the wheel of karma because of their awareness of what is really going on with their decisions and all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying they're always good. I mean, I'm not perfect. You know what I mean? Like I've done shitty things in my life. I've hurt people. I've mended things. I've done good. I've done bad. We've all done things that can be perceived as a polarity. But it's, in the end, it's like, one, how have you held on to it? Are you remorseful of it? Do you feel like you're a bad person because of it? Do you do it because there's some sadistic reason? You know what I mean? There's so many things when it comes into self-reflection, and that's why I do a lot of release work. Like in Asaya Ka Luxa, there's a huge release work area where like release work is so important. It doesn't matter if you're a witch or a magician, whatever you want to call yourself, a human being walking around the street. You should be doing release work, and that's revisiting certain traumatic or things that you have attachments to and confronting them and getting over them. It really is like that, and it sucks because I've done certain consultations with people, and I'm allowed to bring this one up because I asked her, and this happened years ago, even before the Violet Gateway, my old website that got hacked, and it was, I helped this one girl that was like, unfortunately, she was like very aggressively raped, and she didn't leave her house. She had a certain form of agoraphobia where she didn't want to leave, and she knew it was spiritual. She was very spiritual. She was very into meditation, and we worked on a ton of release work for months. And I told her, I was like, I'm not, and I knew there was some kind of MK Ultra programming in her, and we had to work through this. And I didn't really like taking those kind of people on when it comes to deprogramming, because usually people with that kind of programming in them that she had at her base was like, okay, she's either going to live or she's going to kill herself. And I didn't really want to take that responsibility on when it came into like a healing process with somebody. But I don't know, I thought she would do really good, so we went at it. And I told her exactly what could happen, what she would probably have to, do. Like, you're going to really meet some horrific things. We worked for months doing this. And eventually it got to the point where she felt good enough to start going out, started going on little walks and all this kind of stuff. And she started feeling good. She started releasing the trauma, and just happened one day she was at a grocery store standing right next to her assailant.
Oh wow.
Yeah, picking out fruits and stuff like that, or all the vegetables and stuff. And I was just like, and when she told me, I was like, well, I mean, how did you feel? And she's like, well, at first I felt like this electricity, like I got scared for a brief moment. She goes, and I just went into that release work state. She goes, and I realized that the final part was me to do this in the physical. She goes, so I didn't make anything. He didn't recognize me. I recognized him. She goes, and she was sat there and did release work on the experience. She goes and understood why somebody maybe had to do that, or why I had to go through it. She goes, or why, what he was feeling, what I was feeling, I went through all the emotions right there. She goes, and I was able to basically, she was not forgive him. She was, but at least understand. She goes, and not be afraid of it. Yep. And she was fine. And she's like, dude, she goes, it was the most amazing experience. She goes, if that would have happened to me months ago, she goes, I would have absolutely lost my mind. She goes, and I would have been in the psych ward. So it was like, I bring up that story to this day, and I've even told some of my clients and, my day job that, because it was just amazing. And she did a lot of work. I gave her a lot of credit for it. I doubt she's even listening, but she did the work. That's for damn sure.
Well, you know what? I think that her assailant had to be there. I think that was the ultimate.
And that's what happens with release work. And a lot of people that take my courses and stuff, when we go through release work, I'm like, hey, you might have to physically relive this shit again. But it's how you go about doing it and where your new reaction is to it. I mean, release work can help with exes, can help with family members, can do all this kind of stuff, but it still goes back onto how you're feeling in the new experience and how you're creating that new reality.
Well, in Toltec shamans, there's Toltec exercises that talk about just that, where you should go into meditation and you should go back, and you can't do it all in one meditation. It's going to take months and years even, where you're going to go back and pick a point in life as a child, your earliest memories, and you're going to start to relive your life to the clarity of that you can up to now. And as you go through each stage, you view, and I always talk about mindfulness to students that I teach, that you need to step outside of yourself and view why you do the things that you do, and view it as a third person. And as you do that, look at those things that maybe you don't even realize you have attachments to, but you, by doing that, realize you did. And then you have to go back and absolve and dissolve all of that. And as you will do that and move to present day, you will feel completely different. You will literally release a karmic / spiritual weight. You will be lighter. You will physically feel lighter. I think Rondell Overman put that in his book years ago, the Black Book of the Gray Man, I think, or something along those lines. The workbook of the El Ghul system. And at the end of it, he talks about Don Juan and Carlos Castaneda, who I bring up a lot of times on the show because I love Carlos Castaneda. And they talk about that, and that's where it comes from, is there's this exercise of going back and releasing that attachment, as John said, and it is profound. You will change everything about you, but oftentimes, like a video game, there's the end boss, whether that's something consciously that you do, or in this woman's case, something physical where she was next to her assailant. That had to be the final boss that she had to face. How will you react? Will you fold? Or will you stand triumphant at the end and beat that? Yes, you'll never get over what happened to you, but you also won't let it weigh you down for future years to come. And I think that's huge. And I mean, you mentioned,
I think she got the job that she wanted after.
Oh, awesome!
A lot of good things. I mean, I lost contact with this was years ago, but yeah, I mean, once that was done, I mean, it was a very, very intense time. So I think it was just like, okay, we know too much about each other.
Yeah, there's a point.
Enjoy yourself, because when you get into that really deep healing moments with those people, they know a lot about you too. You know what I mean, you don't guide somebody there without at least kind of guiding through relevant maybe experiences, not overshadowing their experience, but like finding some kind of understanding when you're guiding them through it. You know what I mean? So you kind of go through the experience with them.
You do, and I think there needs to be a separation.
I don't know. I'm not a Bible scholar by any means, but I think like even Jesus or some of the prophets even said that, when you go into a healing, when they heal them, they themselves are healing.
Yes.
So they're like taking on the same exact energy, and that's healing work is very, very intense, because a good healer is able to take on somebody else's energy, their pain, their everything, and almost filter it through themselves to be able to connect to that person and funnel that other healing energy, because you almost have to take it from them. Like it's almost like a form of vampirism. And you have to have either really good entities or spirits working with you that are going to filter that through, or you're going to have to be a very tuned individual. And I've met certain people, especially in our community, in the occult community. I've met, certain mediums, and I'm sure she knows her name. She's a phenomenal medium, and I've been proven. I needed to know certain things, and she was always 100%. She was always spot on. She's phenomenal, and I'm not going to name drop anything just for, exclusivity, but she knows who she is, and she's really good. And those type of people are those people that are really good at their craft. There's certain people that are really good at mediumship. There's people that are good at writing books. There's people that are good scientists. There's, and really we have to get into a world like that. We have to get into the world where people are birthed. They're like, okay, this person's a good scientist. Let's push them in the science world. This person's a good mathematician. Let's push them in the mathematician world. And that's how we're going to gain a real huge consciousness on this planet that's going to far evolve where we were, hundreds of thousands of years ago.
And I talked about that on one of the past episodes where, people need to embrace their specialty, even if it's not their passion. If you excel at something spiritually in a certain area, you should follow that. Instead of being spread out amongst 10 different things, and I'm a great scryer, and I'm a great energy worker, and I'm a great healer, but I'm also great at cursing, no, you need to pick what you're good at and stay with it, because if we all focus on our specialty, then you get with the people who are strong in those areas that you're not, and together we can do things. But someone that says I'm good at 15 different areas is the person that's full of shit, as I talked about recently. And now you were mentioning, and I'll give a shout out to someone that's in my circle, Natasha Michelle, who's one of our sponsors of Little Shop of Lilith in Butler, Pennsylvania, brick and mortar shop, she does exactly what you just said. She will help people going through massive amounts of trauma and go through healing with them, and she lives it with them. But she actually, through a different form of psychic vampirism and astral vampirism, will suck in and take on that trauma that they've felt and filtered it through her. And she talks about that with people. It's kind of a different way to look at vampirism, and she does a very good job of healing people.
That's fantastic.
It is. It's a very unique thing. So I didn't take commercial break tonight, folks, on any of my sponsors, because Jon and I really always get along very well when we talk, and there really is no need for pauses. So to my sponsors out there tonight, I'm sorry you don't get a spotlight. But I will give a quick shout out to Natasha for, like I said, for that service that she provides, since it was fitting with what Jon and I were just talking about. And one other thing I want to say, we were talking about being above the pendulum, the motion. That goes back to the Corpus Hermeticum, the 7 Hermetic principles, and the principle of rhythm, which was number, I think it was the 5th role of the 7. In the Corpus Hermeticum, they talk about being able to get above the pendulum. If you can get above the pendulum sway, you no longer are subject to it swaying either way, because as far as it swings to the right is as far as it swings to the left. When you're having those ultimate highs, it'll usually be followed by an ultimate low. It goes back and forth. It's the rhythm of the world. Well, you can get to a point where you rise up to the center point and you sit on top of it, and it doesn't affect you either way.
And it goes back to vibration.
It goes back to vibration.
That explanation goes all the way back to vibration.
Yep.
You're in the music. You've been in the music just as long as I have. And it's like, we know that music can convey an emotion. It can have a physical effect. I don't know what that beep was.
I have no idea either. I was looking around like, oh shit, something's happening.
No clue. I told you earlier. But it's all vibrational. And if we look at the physical body as vibrational, look at the other beings in the galaxy and other entities that could be out there, physical, outside of our vibrational spectrum, that might have a different body, because based on the vibrational spectrum that they live in. If we look at it in color, obviously a being from a violet vibration would look different from somebody from a red or a brown vibration.
Yep.
So we have to realize that this is all super vibrational, and it goes down to your thoughts first, the mind patterns. It's all what's incoming, the mental pattern first, how that mental pattern stimulates an emotional pattern, and that emotional pattern then stimulates that physical manifestation. And that's what I always consider, it goes your mental pattern, then the astral plane, and then your physical reality. It's all filtered in. If we can all work as one to create a reality, which will realistically never happen in our lifetime, the world would spawn a little differently. But then we'd be looked at as, human race would be looked at as like a group consciousness, a hive mind. We look at other beings that some people in, my community with like the UFO community and more of that kind of fringe conspiracy community, they look at certain beings that I look at as, almost gods, and you touched on, how God has play in this physical world and has created things in the physical world. I do agree, although I would almost rebuttal that, because what I've found is, God created angels and jinn, or angels and ETs. Okay? And then man was created. And it was, in more my understanding of it, it was ETs that created our physical reality. So we have to also look at ETs as very far removed from our physical reality, what we perceive to be physical. Because to some of the ETs, the astral realm is still perceived as physical. And if you can even conceptualize a type of being, a type of group consciousness that has been able to create literally a physical playground for consciousness to incarnate into, and they can siphon almost like a technology, it's created by God, but it's more controlled and created and filtered in through a much lower intelligence than God, but still much, much higher than humans.
As you mentioned council before, it's a council overseeing and governing this world. Now, do you think then, last two things I want to go over, because crazy enough, we're almost out of time. We flew through it. Do you think then the astral's more real, and I hate to use the word real, but more real than the manifest world, and that the manifest world really is just almost like a side effect of the astral? Do you agree that kind of is the case, that is more of the realm that everything's on?
Sure.
It's a byproduct, yeah. So I mean, like, they're more focused on that realm, but there's always higher and lower. There's the opposite ends of the spectrum. It's another Hermetic principle there. There's lesser and greater degrees of everything. There's no good or bad. There's just lesser and greater degrees. So when you look at it that way, the astral is really the center of creation of lower beings, but there's still lower vibrations than that, and it just brings us into flesh. So like right now we're operating as flesh. You see me waving my hands around, folks, but there's really an astral version of me above this, and that's more the real version than this.
And what's great is some people are ETs, some people are jinns, some people are demons, some people are angels, some people are just spirits, some people are humans, some people are, and it's crazy, because I remember when I came back from my death experience, I had seen that in people's energy field clearly. It was like, oh my God, like, I'd be looking at somebody, I could see their physical, I'd be looking at them like you, but like an overlay would appear over them that made them look different.
Interesting.
And, this is why I started getting into the whole, reptilian concept and all this kind of shit. It's like, no, that's a real thing. I've seen them. Actually, a lot of people that have actually died and been blown open, they've seen them, but it's not what you think it is. And, there's certain people out there that make it seem like there's, the physical thing of shape-shifting. Yeah, that might happen, but it happens more often psychically than it's going to actually physically.
Exactly. I mean, it's just almost like the whole dog-man werewolf thing. I mean, there are werewolf-type beings, but let me tell you, folks, it's not usually going to be a physical being running around. People can project their consciousness into different animalistic forms on the astral, and can be seen by physical eyes if strong enough. And, people have seen people attacked by these creatures, and then they shoot at them and they vanish. Well, that's because they weren't a physical being. They were a spiritual being. But if you hit the spiritual being, it will affect the physical body.
Yeah. And that's why also, because a spirit can, you want to call it, possession. You can call it possession, but take over a body or have a walk-in, like where the other spirit is pushed out and the spirit comes in. It's more so much that personality is overtaken, and that's how that spirit's taking into that physical reality in a sense. So it's like possession still happens, but this astral reality of somebody being something else is very real. I met somebody once that, I wish I was still in contact with him, but he was like a total traveler. Like he would just whimsically get up and he basically lived in an RV. He was like one of the coolest people I've ever met. Super, super smart. And it was like one of those people I just never knew where he came from. He was a Swedish guy, like he was just a really cool guy. And he always told me he was not a human, and he had all these amazing information and all this stuff. And I used to physically meet with this person, and then one day he just disappears. It's like, okay, well,
it's usually how that happens, though.
Was that a figment of my imagination? Does this really happen? I remember physically being, I touched his guitar. I remember I touched his guitar. But it's like, and at that moment, I believe people can even become a certain spirit to be able to convey a message or be a guide for somebody. And there's so much infiltrating from the astral to the physical, the same way that there is the physical to the astral.
Yep.
And you can look at a human being as just a vessel with an antenna, and it's the consciousness constantly going in and out. Now, what consciousness does that hold at the tightest core? I mean, that's up to somebody to figure out.
Yep. I love that.
Soul. If it's not the soul, then it's something else. It's a form of mind control.
When I think, and as you said, there is something at the core of it, and that's what we are, and we have to figure out what that is. But as you said, with being an antenna, you do bring in a lot of other things. And as I told you before, one of my main focuses in my practice is Kimbanda, and very big on spiritual possession. So like when people look at possession, they look at like, oh my God, I'm possessed. Possession's a Tuesday. You know what I mean? That's nothing crazy out of the element. The whole point is to let these spirits take possession, because that's the greatest way of communication. So we've been taught to believe that possession is such a bad thing. No, possession is how most cultures across the world for millennia have talked to the spirits and allowed them to take in physical form, to communicate to a different level. And it's very potent, it's very powerful, and it can be very life-changing. So get possessed, folks. But, before we wrap up for the evening, Jon, I want you to finish this evening with the talks of your new book. I believe that you are working on, and I don't want to misspeak, but I believe you are working on a book in the realm of Meliktos. You gave a different name, but I believe of something of that realm.
Yeah, Zeta Malek.
Now tell us a little bit more about that.
One of the consciousnesses that I have, that's actually part of my cellular DNA, I guess, is a type of being called Zeta Andromedan. It shouldn't be misunderstood as like a Zeta Reticuli or like a gray or anything like that, because there's a huge history behind all of that, which I hope to explain in the book very well. But that's the main book I'm going to be focusing on for a while. It's probably going to take a little bit because there's a lot of information. But it's what I want to put out because it kind of gives credence to a certain race that maybe has been spat on for a long time. And it's not even a race. It's almost like racism has been done on them because it goes back to the biological AI that I was talking about earlier when it comes to ships.
Okay.
And they're one of the most advanced first creations in physical reality. So we're talking astral plane and physical world, what we consider physical world. So when I talk about physical reality, I'm talking about the astral plane too. And they are one of the first, ever created. And they're very old, they still exist, but they're very far removed from this galaxy. If you're going to put them into a galaxy, they'd be Andromeda. And you can find the Zeta Andromedan star, you can go on Google and look it up and see where it all is and stuff. But this race I know as Zeta Andromedan. And basically in the book, I share a script, which is, they don't speak a language because it's all telepathic. But it was a form of symbols that I was able to pull through the abjad system and the Arabic letters to be able to more tune a telepathic gematria sequence, if you will. And through this, there's colors and certain tones and stuff like that that's involved with it. My contact with this intelligence has been my whole life. Even when I was a kid, still remember being 4 years old, interacting with this being.
Okay.
Very close to me. It's not a personal book to him per se, but it's very credence to the Zeta Andromedan form. Which a lot of beings have stole. The reptilians have stole their form. The Orions have stole their form. The Greys. The skin itself has been stolen because they're not a being. They're the first creation was a biological suit almost that consciousness was able to just incarnate in. It was high consciousness, so it was very angelic. It was very angelic, and this to me is like the first Eden. This is. When we talk about Eden, this was the original, creation for these spirits to start incarnating. Now, of course, it's spread out, it's different things, this is history in its making, really. But they were one of the first made, and their story is very interesting. So I hope to be able to prevail it very well. But I also am going to dive into magic squares very deep because they're a highly advanced, mathematical consciousness.
And I love the fact that your work is so based on mathematics because, as we talked about earlier, it's very, very important. And you have always portrayed that since I first came across you. Mathematics is a huge part of your practice. The other thing I love about your work is the beauty of your writing. Not only writing in your books, but I'm saying your personal logbooks and grimoires. When you look at your magic squares and you look at what you share of your drawings, beautiful. I mean, the penmanship itself is just gorgeous. So you can see the time you put in it.
Everything's always hand done first.
Yeah.
All the information pulling and the names and any kind of geometry is always done hand. And then I try to bring it into the digital world the best I can. There's a certain script that I would love to be able to bring out. I don't want to make that in Photoshop. Maybe I'll contract it out. I just really do not want to make it. There's a lot going on with it. But luckily have most of them rendered, so I'll get something on paper and I'll try to digitally create it at some point.
God bless you for that, man, because I'll tell you what, I can't imagine. Like I said, I couldn't imagine the time just going into your writing, like I said, then let alone try to bring it into a digital world and then do what you've done, but it's been very impressive. I certainly can't wait to get my hands on the newest book. I'm not going to say the name because I can't do it, but we're going to Azazya'il.
Azazya'il's good.
I'm getting there. But I can't wait to get my hands on that very soon. That will be happening. And then, I very much look forward to the news of the release of your new project that you're working on. It sounds quite profound, and I can't wait to share that. As it comes out, let me know. I'd be glad to market it on the show and push it out there to our listeners. And do want to thank each and every one of you out there for tuning in this evening for another thought-provoking and great content episode. If you're liking what you hear, share it around, show it to other people, bring them in and let them find out about knowledge. That's what we wish to bring with this show, is to give you guys something to ponder on in different ways of thinking, and we certainly do that. So thank you to each and every one of you. And, before we finish this evening, let's see. We have next on the lineup, which is in 2 weeks. Hold on a second here. My phone's not working for me. We have the 27th, July 27th, which is 2 weeks from now. We have Augustine Mourier, who runs the Abysmal Serpent cult, the satanic cult. We're going to be talking to him about what his thoughts are currently on Satanism, what his thoughts are on a lot of different topics with the left-hand path. So it'll be a little bit of a different type of episode than tonight, but they always are fun. We're always giving you great content. Tonight was a blast, John. I knew it would be. It was great to catch back up with you after these years.
Yeah, it was good. Yeah.
And it's always fun to just wham out on some extraterrestrial intelligences and talking about Jinn and everything in between, because I don't get to do that too often. So I want to thank you, and great work. Like I said, keep doing what you're doing, brother. I'm always a big fan and love to see what you're doing.
Yeah, likewise, man. Keep growing this. I think this is fantastic. It's come a long way.
Thank you.
And eventually make it into a roundtable discussion. We get people around like a Joe Rogan table.
I would love that, man. That'd be great. The sky's the limits, brother.
Yeah, right.
Well, listen, folks, I want to thank all of you. Like I said, make sure you click that share button, and we'll catch you in 2 weeks on the 27th here on Knights of the Nephilim. John, you have a wonderful night, brother. Thank you again. Catch you next time, guys.